Hello, everyone. Welcome to the tutorial of Atelier thickness parameters. In this lesson, we will cover a detailed explanation of the main thickness parameters, the methods to check when the pattern thickness cannot be displayed, and the application of render thickness and collision thickness in some special scenarios. Let's take a look together. There are 9 fabric samples for a demonstration on explaining thickness. The thickness parameters include extra render thickness and extra collision thickness in the pattern property editor, and the thickness setting in the fabric property editor. There is also cloth thickness 3D located in the upper left corner under the fabric panel, and the pattern thickness switch in the pattern property editor. If the pattern cannot display thickness, you can check these 3 places. One is the extra render thickness. The other is the pattern thickness switch, which is generally open by default. And the last one is the cloth thickness 3D in the upper left. These 3 factors are essential for displaying thickness. Next, let's take a look at fabric thickness. The specific location is here. Before that, let's create new fabrics with default thickness of 0.5, thickness of 20, and thickness of 50, each distinguished by color for clarity. You can see that by adjusting the fabric thickness, the pattern thickness is correctly displayed, and the simulation is normal. At this point, both the extra render and extra collision thickness of the cloth are 0. Therefore, the fabric thickness is the most basic thickness property, and the extra thickness is based on the fabric thickness. For example, in the current operation, by adding extra render thickness and extra collision thickness to the thickness 50, the fabric will continue to thicken. Next, let's take a look at the extra collision thickness. Change the values of it to 0.5, 20, and 50 for comparison. You can see that even if the fabric thickness is 0.5, changing the collision thickness will result in a distance between the pattern pieces. This is because the collision thickness represents the collision gap between faces, which is separate from the extra render thickness. Finally, let's take a look at the extra render thickness. Using 0.5, 20, and 50 as examples, you can see that at this point, when simulating again, the collision thickness of the pattern is not changed, and there is undoubtedly a phenomenon of penetration. We can perform a vertical comparison. In fact, if we add the first row to the second row, we can achieve the effect of the third row. Using the thickness 50 fabric as an example, let's demonstrate briefly. Like this, if you change the fabric thickness, the thickness of all the pattern that use this fabric will change. This would require adding many fabrics to create clothing, making it challenging for subsequent model exports for texture mapping. Therefore, it's advisable to keep the fabric thickness default and adjust extra thickness to create the model. So, how do you adjust render thickness and collision thickness in specific situations? Let's look at some examples of special cases. Firstly, in situation where the pattern don't fit properly, you can reduce the extra collision thickness to 0 to minimize the gap between patterns. Additionally, if patterns adhere too tightly and there's a risk of penetration, you may need to increase the extra collision thickness to create a bit more space between the pattern. Depending on the situation, you may also need to increase the extra render thickness. Furthermore, when dealing with lace or other elements with substantial rendering thickness, it's essential to increase extra collision thickness, ideally matching it with render thickness to avoid penetration issues. Lastly, for areas where a faux two-layer effect is needed, you can create this layered appearance by setting different extra render thickness, eliminating the need to create 2 actual layers and significantly reducing the face count. So, this concludes our lesson. Finally, let's review the key points covered in this lesson. Feel free to like, share, and participate in the comments section. See you in the next video.